Welcome to the Cook the Books podcast by Tea with Coffee Media. I'm Tyler Witkowski, the president and publisher of Tea with Coffee Media.
And I'm Kelsey Ann Lovelady, the vice president of marketing.
Back in 2021, we took our experience as independent authors and used it to create a publishing company with our friends. Our mission is to help other indie authors reach more and greater success.
This podcast is dedicated to helping authors find the perfect recipe to create their books and their persona as an author. We talk about everything from plotting to character creation to marketing to using your life experiences to create your unique voice and stories.
Welcome to the show. Welcome to the very first episode of Cook the Books podcast with myself, Tyler Witkowski, the president and publisher of Tea with Coffee Media, and Kelsey Ann Lovelady, who is our vice president of marketing at Tea with Coffee Media. Kelsey, how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. It was a day started off a little rough, but some hugs and some loving from the friends, and it brightens up quickly. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good, just relaxing. I've enjoyed today, with my father-in-law and spending a lot of time with the dogs. Start a new contract that I pulled for myself. I'll be starting that this week. So I'm enjoying my time off while I've got it, and then back to the real world.
Yeah, pesky little real world. I gotta find my trip back to the real world too.
Yeah. But you know what? We've got Tea with Coffee Media that we're doing. We've got the podcast that we're doing. We're writing books, so we're staying busy. We're always doing something.
Absolutely.
But I mean, I think that's something that people like me, bipolar, and people like you who are autistic, that's what we do. We keep our mind busy, because if not, we get lost in our own thoughts. So
absolutely. And our own thoughts are landmines.
Very much landmines. Very much. So the latest news in the writing community has been a lot about AI. AI created covers, AI written books. I remember seeing a couple weeks ago, there was an author who over one weekend wrote a children's book and had it illustrated by AI and got it published. Yeah. So
wow.
What is your take on how AI is going to impact us and how it already is impacting us as indie authors?
Well, the biggest worry that I see across the board, whether it's AI that creates art, AI that creates story, whatever, is unfortunately AI programs are pretty rampant with plagiarism. And AI makes it very easy to steal a real person's artwork or writing, and you may not even know that you're doing it if you use that AI program. So unfortunately, it's not very ethical from that standpoint. In my personal opinion, I frankly don't think that AI is ever going to perfectly replace human-made artwork, writing, whatever, because there's something about the human experience that is exceedingly unique.
Yeah.
In that you cannot predict how the human experience is going to go for any one individual. There are 1,000,001 factors that can change into how a person grows and becomes who they are meant to be. And even with computers being as advanced as they are, there are some things that I think AI just can't take into account.
Yeah. Have you used any AI platforms, just played with them at all?
I tried out some AI art creating platforms like a while ago, probably a year ago. I want to say it was called Wumbo, I think. And the reason why I tried it out is because I think I saw it on Instagram where they said if you type in the title of your book and see what gets made, it can be very beautiful. So I tried it out and I did like what it created. I briefly thought to myself, oh, this might make a good cover for my book. I created one for my most recent book, Indifferent. And I thought, oh, that might work. But then I looked into the efficacy of it, and do I even have the copyright privilege to use AI created artwork for my cover? And because the answer was so non-conclusive but leaning towards no, I said, okay, leaving that behind. And
Right.
my fascination with it quickly dried up. What about you?
So I've used some writing platforms just to play with them and see what they're all about. The stuff that it comes up with is very flat and very bland for me. You know, with a previous position that I was in the marketing communications world, we had looked into using it to as a quicker way to generate captions and things like that. But for me, I was like, there's no replacement for an actual human writing a caption because, you know, I always say that branding and marketing is about bringing a personality and a persona to a business or a company or an author or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
And you can't bring a persona to the table if you're not an actual person creating these captions and creating these descriptions. You know, you've got to add some sort of human nature to it to make it relatable to people and make people trust you.
It goes back to the old Descartes philosophy, I think, therefore I am.
Yes.
And a computer can think within the realms that you ask for it to think. A calculator can think within the realms of, I know how to add or subtract or multiply numbers. But if you asked a calculator what's the meaning of life, yeah, you're probably going to get
42.
42.
Yeah.
I was going to say it was probably 53,005.
I like that one too.
No, not 53,005. 58,008. It's the one where when you turn the calculator upside down, it's
right.
boobs.
Right. Yeah.
And even that requires a human brain going behind it to go,
look at this. Yeah. And I've seen these screenshots of people using AI and trying to have like conversations with AI, and they'll tell AI create a sentence that ends with Apple, and like Apple is in the sentence, but it doesn't end the sentence like the instruction said. So it's like, okay, so AI, I mean, yeah, it has capabilities to do things, but if it can't even follow basic instructions, you know,
exactly,
then why would I use it? Because, you know, what is it if it can't follow the basic structure or the basic instructions, then what is the point in even having it? Because the whole thing is that it's supposed to be advanced and it's supposed to be able to comprehend these things, but it doesn't. And I think that goes back to the human comprehension and the human nature of things, because like you said, you can program a computer to understand certain things, but if you miss one programming code, the computer's not going to understand 1,000 different things. So it's impossible to give all the knowledge in the world to one computer. I mean, sure, well, yeah. So unless you're somebody like Skynet who puts it into the Terminator or something.
Exactly. No, I remember this. There was this trend. I want to say it was like 2 years ago because I was seeing it pop up all over like YouTube and Twitter, where people who are smarter than I am programmed a computer to watch something like 1,000 hours worth of a certain type of genre of movie, like horror, romance, and then challenge it to write a script based off of what it saw. And when I tell you it was worse than a Hallmark movie, because all it did was just, here are all the tropes that I saw shoved into the first page.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Exactly. And going back to the level of intelligence that a computer program can have, spell check, which has been a feature in like any writing document for nigh on decades at this point, is still imperfect in and of itself. It still thinks it's smarter than the human beings who are using it.
Even programs like Grammarly and Pro Writing Aid are not, I mean, yeah, they're great and they're more advanced than a regular spell checker for Google Docs or Word or Pages or whatever people use, but it's not perfect. You still, anybody who knows anything about writing and publishing, self-publishing, traditional publishing will tell you that even if you run your manuscript through one of these grammar checkers and spell checkers, you still need to have it professionally edited, because there are certain things that it doesn't catch, and it can't catch because it's not programmed to catch.
Exactly. And like in the case of, if you're writing a fantasy novel, it will flag every single word that it thinks is spelled incorrectly if it's like a made up name of a place or a person or a concept or a thing. And there's no way to turn that off.
Or if your last name is Witkowski.
You know the pain.
Yeah, you get flagged for everything. Yeah, so I just, I think we're both on the same page here. AI is not the future of writing and book cover design, and it's still imperfect.
Yeah.
And I think it always will be imperfect, because like you said with spell check, I mean, we've had spell check for how long now? Like 20, 30 years at least?
At least since the beginning of like home computers being a thing. At least since the beginning of Microsoft Word, which was somewhere back in the early 90s.
Right. So over 30 years. And it's still not perfect. It still has its flaws and its kinks. And so
exactly.
AI is the same way. And who knows, we're, like I said, we're still over 30 years into spell check and still has issues. Well, AI is a newer concept, probably in the last 5 years. Who knows what it'll look like 30 years? It may be completely defunct because nobody wants to use it, because it does put out such shitty results.
Exactly. And the thing is, like, human beings who consume this stuff, consume media, whether it's movies, videos, music, they can see through bullshit, and they can see through bullshit quickly. I recall it was probably a decade ago at this point, but somebody made a point to say it took 5 people to write Justin Bieber's hit song Baby. And on the opposite side of that, one person wrote Bohemian Rhapsody.
Yeah.
You can't fake genius.
Right.
And you cannot fake human genius.
Right. There's no imitating it.
No, you can't. It's literally impossible. And if other human beings can't do it, a computer that does not understand human experience sure as hell cannot.
Right. And even it goes to your programmers, how much knowledge does your programmer have of XYZ topic that you want it to do? Because they could be, anybody that is just typing up code and saying, oh, well, this makes sense to me, but they don't really know about the topic at hand.
And the other thing to that is, unfortunately, if you're setting a computer to do research on a specific subject, you can't specify like what is necessarily considered a non-credible source. Right. So if you asked a computer to write a story about racism, it could also be taking its information from certain resources that probably should not be speaking on racism.
Yeah, that is very true.
There's no differentiation of what is considered a credible source. You can try to program that, but a computer is to an extent, it's like a little kid in that it'll believe everything that it's told.
Yeah, exactly.
Unless something else, some outside force tells it otherwise.
Yep.
Whereas a human being, after we get to a certain point, after we learn a little bit, have a little bit of life experience, we can start to go liar, 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 bad person, shitty person, good person.
Yep. Perfectly put. So I think let's jump into today's topic.
Yes.
You want to let the listeners know what we're going to be discussing today?
We are going to be talking about what is the perfect recipe to being a writer and to writing a book.
All right. I'm excited to get started about this because, both you and I have been writers before we ever started the publishing company. We met through writing. So, we've got a little bit of experience. I've been writing professionally since about 2018, 2019. And you've been writing even longer, publishing books. I think you published your first one, back in 2016?
It would have been 2018, but I started
2018.
writing it in like 2014 or 15.
Yeah. So, we've got a lot of experience in this, but there is no perfect answer either. This is just our recipe. My grandma has a different recipe than your grandma does for peach cobbler or whatever it may be.
Exactly.
And, so just like that, you and I both have different recipes and the listeners have different recipes, but this is what we've discovered works best for us.
Exactly. And your recipe is going to change based off of your needs, based off of how you learn, based off of how you work, your general work ethic. It's always going to change. And that's why we started this podcast, why we call it Cook the Books, is because we're teaching people how to write their own recipes for how best to be a writer for themselves and how best to write their own book.
Yes, exactly. So I think, what in your opinion is the starting foundation for this recipe? Where do all writers need to start? Because there is kind of a ground zero where we make that decision where we want to be a writer. So where do you see that being? Where's that ground zero?
Oh gosh, that's a bigger question than what I was expecting, honestly. Probably in how do you conceive ideas and how do you come up with the ideas for your book? I'm an acting major. My degree is in musical theater performance. So I can guarantee you 9 times out of 10, I come up with book ideas by first coming up with the main character, because that's what acting was all about for me. It was about creating a character and living honestly under imaginary circumstances, which is what acting has always been described as.
Right.
So what I'll do is I'll think of a character who has to live honestly under imaginary circumstances that I think are unique and compelling.
So that's interesting because, and I like that answer, and it makes a lot of sense that your ground zero is how you conceive your ideas. Because mine, I actually come up with the titles first, which is way backwards for how a lot of people do it, because I've seen a lot of people say, don't even worry about your title until you finish the book. But that's just my very first book. I came up with the title first. I was driving home and I saw it stylized, not alone, with the parentheses around not. And I saw that in my head while I was driving, and I was like, that's it. This is the book. And instantly the chapters started coming to me. The themes came to me. The main character came to me. And the same thing happened with the Seeds of Love. I came up with the name Sunflower Kisses for the book series, and then the Seeds of Love, and followed that kind of theme throughout the rest of the series. But I don't know. It just happens for me like that. I have the idea. It's kind of like seeing a movie and reading the title and being like, oh, I bet this movie is about XYZ, and flipping over the back of it and reading the thing and be like, oh yeah, the title does tell the story, which to me is important. Mm-hmm. You want somebody to be able to, because not everybody is going to pick up your book and turn it around to read the blurb. So the title is a big thing, and the cover is a big thing too. But yeah, I mean, that's a good answer. I think, that's what I would have to go with too, is, ground zero is where you come up with your ideas. And then I think you move into the plotter pantser stage, where you start either plotting or you start writing. Now you're a plantser. You're a little bit of a mix
of
both. Combo. Yeah. So how does that work for you whenever you're developing these books and ideas? How do you determine, which method to use or which combination to use and on which books?
So the way that I like to describe my outlining ideas is I have a map. I know where my destination is. I know where I need to end up. But I'm not afraid to go off the map if I find a shortcut or if I find the more scenic route that I want to explore. So once I have all of my ideas for my books kind of put down in my head, thought dumped onto paper, I can organize them in a way that I know that I want things to flow But again, if in the process of writing, if I realize this chapter is unnecessary, it rarely happens, but it does happen. Or if I realize I need an extra chapter to talk about this, I'm willing to go off the plan. And I actually have to go off the plan because I can't force my brain to push through with the original plan if I know that this would be better.
Right.
It's physically impossible for me.
I'm very much the same way. I'm a planter. I like to plot out the book and say, this is what this chapter is going to be about. This is what this chapter is going to be about. I have spreadsheets for all my characters so that things are consistent, as far as eye color, hairstyle, what they drive, how tall they are, how big, what size they are, but things change as I start writing. I'm like, you know what, this character would make more sense as an Asian or an African American character to add a little bit more realism to it. I think, I'm ashamed to say, but I think all writers have a little bit of a tendency to focus on their skin color or their disability or their whatever it may be when they're writing books. And that's not a bad thing at all. But you've got to understand that there is diversity and representation in the world. And most stories need some representation from races outside of your own race.
Yeah.
So, that was a little side note. I don't know why I got on that tangent.
No, but it's important. It's important to bring up because that is an issue that a lot of authors face. You're trying to be diverse in your writing, but you need to do it in the right way.
Right. Now, you were telling me a story. I know we were going to save this for a later podcast, but I think this is a great introduction to the story you were telling me before the podcast. Why don't you tell me a little bit more about the situation where there was a white writer who was trying to write a book about the struggles of African Americans, but she was white?
Yeah, so this is a big deal and has been a big deal very recently within TikTok over like the last maybe 2 weeks at most. So this white woman wrote a romance where the two main characters, and I think every character in the book, even including the side characters, are all BIPOC, specifically African American.
Okay.
And the BIPOC book talk community, rightly so, started calling her ass out to say, you cannot be writing this story for 2 reasons. Number one, you are white. You do not understand what it is like to be African American in this world or any other world in this time period or any other time period. And you certainly don't know what it's like to have a relationship in the African American community. Number two, you're taking away a story that should be and could be written by a BIPOC author who actually does understand that. And she doubled down in every single comment section that she came up with. She explained, oh, but they go through the struggles of being Black. They had to be Black. Further reinforcement, you should not have written this book. Wow. It eventually got to the point where she fully deleted her TikTok.
Oh, wow. Like her whole account, not just a TikTok video.
She fully deleted the whole account, and I think she deleted other social medias and might have also taken the book off of Amazon.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I mean, and that speaks volumes for what our voice and the voices of readers and the community can do to impact change. And we've got to use our voices. Kelsey and I just did some author training, which is on YouTube for anybody who's interested, for our authors, about branding yourself. Mm-hmm. And one of the big things with branding is finding your voice and knowing your voice. And I think all authors have a voice that they use to brand themselves in social media and things like that, but also in their books. And you've got to stay consistent. Consistency was one of the big talking points that I had about about branding. Yeah. And you can't be consistent if you're a white author writing about BIPOC struggles, because it's not consistent to your brand. It's not your brand at all. It can't be your brand. Like, it's just There's no way. Now, if you wanted to include a side character and highlight their struggles, that's fine. But get some interview people, talk to people, have sensitivity readers and beta readers who are part of that community and let them read over it. Because
Exactly.
if you don't, then you're just faking it, and no good author fakes their work. We do the research, we write our asses off, we plot or we pants. Both of those are very valid methods of creating, and there's nothing wrong with either one of them.
Yeah. I live by the old adage of write a blank character. Don't write about what it's like to be blank.
Yes.
I can write about an African American character. I can write an African American character. What I can't do is write about what it's like to be African American. And because of that, even if I have African American characters in my book, number one, you're never going to see me using certain words that is perfectly acceptable within the African American community, but should never be said by someone of the Caucasian persuasion, like myself. Number two, you're not going to hear me bring up certain issues. And number three, you're not going to hear me or see me write a specific vernacular or dialect that I personally don't understand.
Right. And I think that's a challenge that all authors face is, whenever we're talking about bringing in diversity into our writing, we've got to understand that there are certain limits that we hit. And I think, all this is really I know people are out there probably thinking, what does this have to do with the recipe for writing your own success?
It does, I swear.
It does, yeah, because when you think about it, I mean, it all involves research, sensitivity. We want to make sure that we're giving the most accurate and best possible product that we can to our readers. And if we're not, then we're doing a disservice to the readers, but we're also doing a disservice to ourselves and the indie community as a whole, because it makes the indie community look less credible in the long run and turns people against the indie writing community.
Exactly, because you could also be doing a serious amount of harm. Yes. If you try to write a story that you yourself do not understand, have never experienced in your life, and could never hope to experience in your wildest of dreams.
So now that we're on that topic, let's talk a little bit about research and how do you research topics for your book. We've talked a little bit about diversity and things, but let's say you're writing, you just released Permanent Reminders a couple months ago, which was a murder mystery. I'm sure the FBI saw your search history whenever you were writing that and was like, man, this chick is crazy. I don't even know if we want to bother her. She may destroy us. So what is your process for research like?
So funny you should say that about the FBI. While I was in the process of early editing the book, I had a friend of mine read the book, and probably about what was the fourth chapter is probably now the second chapter. She said, I've dealt with the police in the case of a murder investigation. This is not how procedure goes. You should really interview a cop to see what procedure is like. So I called my local police department and I interviewed a cop so that I could understand, this is procedure, this is how it works, this is how long it takes to get toxicology reports back, etc., etc., etc. But going back to the question of how do I do research, the funny part of my brain is I don't realize what research I need to do until I come to the moment that I need that research. I'll get to a point in my writing where I go, I don't even know how tall the tallest mountain actually is. Let me look that up really quickly. And in the case of Permanent Reminders, how that came about is I was on Tumblr back in the old days.
Oh yeah, I never used Tumblr.
It was a lot of fun before they went and ruined it, but that's another story for another time. But back in the old days, somebody had shared a resource to writers, which it was, I can't even remember what it was called now, but it was a website that told you or shared news stories about specifically the black market.
Okay.
And it showed you like how much each black market industry is worth. I obviously looked at venoms and poisons to find out how much certain things that show up in the book are worth, along with other stories. I remember I was also on there doing research for like bootleg fashion,
Okay.
like how you'll have knockoff Versace and stuff.
Right.
And it doesn't just cover stuff like that. It also covered how back during the Sochi Olympics, something like 45% of the Canadian hockey jerseys that were sold were counterfeit.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it talks about stuff like that. It brings up news stories without completely making the FBI go, why the hell do you need to know what snake venom costs on the black market?
Yeah. And that's interesting. I love what you started off with, though, and that brings up a really great point, is your research doesn't have to just be Googling something. Your research can be something even more intense, like going out and interviewing your local police or interviewing whatever it may be, a doctor or a veterinarian, or for example, I wrote Not Alone, and there's a scene in there where Abby is teaching Henry how to play soccer. I'm not a soccer player, never have been. I'm a baseball player, and I wrestled a little bit in high school, but I definitely didn't play soccer. And let me tell you, I interviewed my wife and asked her, I was like, explain to me how you would explain to me how to play soccer. I mean, that, explain to me how you would explain to me play soccer. So she did that, and I took it and incorporated it into my own words and wrote it like that. But, normally if I'm writing a book, I'm like you, I don't know what I need to research until I get there.
Yeah.
And once I get there, I've always got a Google tab open if I'm writing either on my phone or in Google Docs, whatever it may be. I've got a Google tab open somewhere easily accessible, so that if I run into a situation where I'm like, ooh, so the Seeds of Love has a ziplining scene. And I've been ziplining before, but I wanted to put a little bit of instructions in there that Kelsey, who was one of the instructors, was teaching Bailey and Clay how to zip line. So I had to look that up and find out the best techniques, and because it had been like 4 or 5 years since I've been zip lining, and I'm probably a little too old for that now. I'm injury prone, and let me tell you, I had a dream that I was zip lining and fell off and fell right into an alligator pit. So,
oh shit.
Yeah, now I'm terrified to go because my dreams come true about 75% of the time. So
yeah,
I'm gonna avoid that one.
Yeah. The tough part is when you get to such a niche topic that you have to research.
Yes.
For my more recent book, Indifferent, I had to specifically look up, and this might be spoilers to some people, but I had to specifically look up if it is a crime to not assist someone or call an ambulance for someone who is suffering from a major medical emergency like cardiac arrest. And I found one place that had a good, solid answer for me. The reason why it was a good, solid answer was because it was someone else's personal account on Reddit explaining what happened when they had a cardiac arrest in the home of a friend, and they completely walked right over them.
Wow.
Yeah. Fun fact, it is in fact not a crime to not call an ambulance or leave someone who's having a heart attack unless you start to administer assistance and then just leave.
Oh, okay. So if you just leave, it's no big deal. But if you start to help and then you leave,
what you can't do is start to do CPR and go, this is taking too long, I gotta go.
Yeah.
And it makes sense that would not be a crime because at least 100 people have had to have had a heart attack on the busy streets of New York City.
Yeah.
No, those natives ain't stopping for shit.
No. They see a bear and keep walking.
Yeah, and I can guarantee you none of them serve jail time for that.
Yeah, that's fair. Which that's also an interesting point is the Reddit situation. You know, you mentioned earlier Tumblr was where you got some information from before, but I think Reddit is also a great source to get. Now, I mean, obviously you have to vet the sources and be careful with some of the sources because they're not
Oh yeah.
always 100% reliable, but at least if you can get 10 or 12 of the same story that are verified, or not the same story but the same message that are verifying the information you're looking for, then you've got a good place to start, and then you can go into more credible sources to make sure that that information is right.
Exactly. I don't use Reddit myself for writing advice. I use it more because I'm a messy, gossipy person, and I love the am I the asshole thread.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, exactly. One of the most wonderful things about social media is that people can share their wisdom, their personal experiences, their tips and tricks and hacks with people. You have to make sure they're reliable and that they work,
Right.
obviously, but people can no longer gatekeep information. There's going to be somebody who goes, I don't benefit from keeping this a secret, and I would help other people if I did tell people, so I'm going to tell people.
A great example of that is the podcast that I went on a couple of weeks ago.
Yep.
That caused a huge blowout in my family. I went on a trauma podcast and talked about some childhood trauma. Um, and I told my story to help other people. I wanted to show people that just because they went through what I went through as a child, the homelessness, the abuse, the mental and the physical abuse, you can still be successful. You can come out of that. You know, growing up, I was told my mom was a teenage parent. I was told that because my parents were teenage parents, I was going to end up in jail. Like 75% of children from teenage parents back in the 90s ended up in jail. And that's the stigma that I grew up because everybody else in my school's parents were in their mid 20s to late 20s when they had them, and my
Mm-hmm.
parent had me when she was 19. So my mom was 19 years older than me, while all these other kids are parents are 25, 30 years older than them. So, you know, I've fought the odds and I've been able to tell my story through podcasts and through social media to help other people. And I think it's so important to do that, to share your real life experiences and your real life stories, to give people hope, to give them some kind of semblance of I can be more than what the world says I'm capable of.
Mm-hmm. For me, I was kind of like on the opposite end of things, especially with my autism diagnosis. It never even occurred, like, even though my parents had taken me to several child psychologists, and at least one of them had said she has, this is no longer the correct term anymore, but Asperger-like tendencies. The doctor also said she'll grow out of them, and my parents never pursued it further. So it didn't really occur to me, maybe I do have autism, until I started seeing people who also have autism posting about it, posting informational stuff, posting little things that people with autism do, and specifically women with autism do, that are indicators of that. And I looked down this list of things that women with autism will do, and it was like, check, 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 check. Oh boy. So
And
I now know who I am, the needs that I have. I found out that I'd been playing life on hard mode
yeah,
all my life because of the internet, because of people sharing information. And now that I know what I need, or I know what disability I have, I now know how to search for what I need, ask for what I need in order to function in this world.
and I think that's a very important thing to mention because when you are a writer, you learn different research methods and you learn how to pick out these credible sources and be able to distinguish, you know, what's real from what's fake. And that's a really good life skill to have. So, for example, whenever you're looking up things like that, or you're looking up medical things, you can find the correct answer instead of one thing, you know, because I think WebMD, if you search, I have a cough, they're going to tell you you have cancer.
That is the joke, yeah.
So, being able to distinguish what's truth from fact is a very important part of life, but it's also a very important part of being a writer, which, it helps translate into a real life situation.
Exactly.
And I think, that's what we mean by the recipe for success for writers is not only their success writing, but their success in life, their success in every undertaking that they take on, and being able to establish dominance, even really, in the field of research, in the field of life, and be able to take that next step is something that's really important, and writers are really good at that.
Exactly.
But so we've talked about the middle, or the beginning, we've talked about the middle. So what's the end of the recipe? What does that final result really look like for you? How do you determine whether you've made a cake worthy of Emerald's approval, or if you've made a burger that's going to get you yelled at by Gordon Ramsay?
I'm still trying to figure that out, because you will recall a conversation we had some time ago in regards to permanent reminders.
Yes.
I wrote permanent reminders back in the fall of 2018 for NaNoWriMo. Failed miserably. But I eventually worked it, and I worked it, and I worked it, and I got it to a point where it was at least a full manuscript. It was a full 50,000 words. And then pandemic hit. I got a job. I kind of had to abandon the project for a while. And by the time I came back to the project, I was so entirely convinced that it was terrible that I just cemented myself to say, okay, I wasted 2 years on this thing and it's never going to be published. I have to come to terms with that. It's fine. Unfortunately, I have fiercely supportive friends who assured me about 5 times, no, this is not garbage. That no, this is not garbage. This is some of your best work. It needs a little bit of tweaking and editing, which is why we have the professional editor. But no, it needs to be published.
Yeah, and I think that's what I was getting ready to say. I mean, it turned out to be some of your most highly reviewed and highly rated books. One of your most highly reviewed and rated books too. I mean, we get all compliments on that book, and especially the cover. Victoria Moxley,
Victoria, wow,
lead cover designer and chief editor. She is amazing at what she does. We will have her on this season, and we will also probably have Caitlin and some of our authors on later this season. But yeah, I mean, that book is just so beautiful, and you put it together in such a way that, I mean, I've read it 4 times now?
Probably at this point.
Yeah, I've read it 4 or 5 times, and I still pick up on new things. My wife Gracie, who helps us run the company, she does second line edits on all of our books now. She loved permanent reminders. She was like, I couldn't put it down. I didn't know, she would have me convinced that it was XYZ that had committed the murder, but then I got another clue that I was like, oh no, maybe it was ABC. And you just did it so beautifully that it's almost like you've been writing murder mystery for your whole career. and it's amazing how, the recipes that we may not see as successful, that we may taste it and be like, this isn't going to be any good, and we keep it hidden, and then one day we just decide to pop it out for our friends, and they're like, this is amazing, why have you never given me this before? And then there are other things that we write and we're like, wow, this is amazing. And we give it to other people and they're like, it needs work.
Yeah.
That's just the way writing works.
Yeah.
And, and nobody's going to have a perfect recipe for every single book.
No.
You can have a basis, you can have a beginning, a middle, and an end that you aim for every single time, but you're never going to be able to put out a perfect book every single time, unless you're Stephen King, and then you just are magical.
Bets are off.
Yeah, you're magical.
Yeah. No, unfortunately, imposter syndrome is kind of the ever-present constant with all forms of artists and creators like us.
Yeah.
We're always going to live in a level of doubt, except for those of us who are either delusional or exceedingly confident.
Yeah.
And to give you an idea of how bad the imposter syndrome was, I think you probably figured this out, but the day that Caitlin told me, yeah, we're publishing permanent reminders, I had a full panic attack.
I remember that.
And then you had to calm me down, other people had to calm me down. And I said, okay, if we're going to do this, I have to be able to rewrite it from scratch. And I've got less than a year to do that.
I remember
that. And I actually worked myself to the point where both Caitlin and Victoria had to like have a Discord call intervention with me. Like, you're allowed to ask for help. You do get this, right? and when I said, I have so much to do, I have to rewrite the book, and I don't know. Do you have to rewrite the book? Give it to Victoria and see what she thinks.
Yeah.
Okay. And she was like, no, this is not the hot garbage that you keep saying that it is.
Yeah.
It just needs a little bit of tweaking. That's all.
Yeah. And I think, you mentioned imposter syndrome, and it kind of reminds me of, it's that necessary evil that all writers and all creators have. It's kind of like using bourbon or wine in your cooking. You want to cook the alcohol out, but it still adds a little bit of flavor. Imposter syndrome, you want to cook it out in the process, but it also adds a little bit of a snap back to reality for some people to say, okay, my work's not the greatest right now. I need somebody to help me with it, and be able to, reach out for that help and reach out for that hand and call the Gordon Ramsays or the grandmas out there, whoever it may be, and say, hey, I need some help. And being able to learn that is a very important part of the process of writing, but it's a very difficult part. I mean, I don't even think I've mastered that. I don't, have you mastered it?
Hell no.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's one of those things that we as authors just have to learn and take advantage of our opportunities to learn more and learn coping mechanisms.
Exactly. And I've never been to the situation where I think my books are perfect. Even the ones that I love the most. Indifferent is my favorite work that I've done thus far. It is, to me, at the current, my magnum opus.
Okay.
I am under no delusion that it is perfect. And by comparison to Permanent Reminders, in terms of the review, it's not doing as well. I still love that book because of what it was for me.
Yeah.
And what it did for me, and the reason why I wrote it.
Yeah.
And that at the end of the day has to be your motivation. You cannot write a book because you think, yes, we'll be the next multimillionaire author. Yes, we'll make so much money. Yes. The chances of that happening in the first place are like, you might have a better chance of winning the lottery.
Yeah.
And
go ahead.
Well, so your motivation for writing has to be, I have stories that I need to tell. Even if nobody hears them, I need to be able to tell them, lest I spontaneously combust.
Right. And I think that's a great way to really talk about the closing of this podcast and the finale, final recipe. Your recipe needs to be something that you're cooking that you want to eat, right?
Exactly.
Your book needs to be the same thing. It needs to be something that you would want to read, because if you want to read it, then chances are other people will want to read it, but it means you're more passionate and more likely to do better when you're writing about this topic. Whereas if you're just writing it to make the money, or if you're just cooking the recipe to make money at a restaurant, you're not really putting your heart and your soul into it because you don't care as much about it. You're just doing it as a means to an end. And that's not the way to approach writing. I think that's a very important, while yes, we talked about at the beginning, the comprehension of the idea, the research that goes into it, the actual writing, the plotting, the pantsing, ultimately what it comes down to is you have to write what you want to read.
Exactly.
And that will be, that's a lot of what we've covered in this podcast today will be covered throughout the season in more depth. We've got a great season planned out for everybody. And Kelsey and I have a book coming out in July, fingers crossed, as long as we get everything done in the next couple of months. It is a Midsummer's Night's retelling, focused on Oberon and Titania. And it's more, it brings them into a modern world, and we role played this a lot, and now we're writing it, and I'm telling you, it's one of my favorite works so far that I've done. We're only 7-8 chapters in now.
8 chapters in, and we probably have another 18 to go.
Yeah. So, we're not quite halfway there yet, but that book is going to be something special, I think.
I am so incredibly excited for this project. It was a lot of fun to role play in the first place, and watching it come together is such a joy. Victoria has already called dibs on editing the damn thing because she's that excited for it.
Yeah.
So I'm very excited for this book. I'm excited to see it come to fruition, and I think a lot of people are going to enjoy it.
I think so too, because it tells more than just a Midsummer's Night's story. It gives the readers something, it's a story of hope, a story of love, of love and heartbreak, really. And being able to take that and develop it into what we're developing it into, I'm so excited.
Exactly.
But aside from our book, we've got a full lineup scheduled for 2023, starting in March through December, and then we've got a couple books lined up for 2024 already. If you're interested in seeing any of those, seeing what the titles are, we haven't released any blurbs yet, but you can visit our website at teawithcoffee.media/coming-soon, and be sure you check that out. And then you can also go to our teawithcoffee.media/about-us to learn more about all of the authors and the team here at Tea with Coffee Media. But we just want to say thank you to everybody for joining in to the very first episode of Cook the Books. Kelsey and I are going to keep doing this. It will be an every other week podcast. On Fridays, we're going to release it. So we will start whenever you're watching this. And then 2 Fridays after that, we'll have another episode for you. So we're really excited about the season. We're excited about this podcast. We're excited about 2023. Kelsey, you got anything to add? Any upcoming projects that you want to plug or anything?
Other than the book that we are working on right now, which we've already talked about, I can't think of anything, but I am thoroughly excited to continue this podcast, to talk more about the writing process, to talk about writing in general and the writing world.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've got a lot planned for this season. We've got 6 episodes planned this season, 10 episodes planned for season 2. We're already planning for season 2, so we don't plan on going anywhere. We're going to be here for a while. As long as Tea with Coffee Media is alive, Cook the Books podcast is alive. So we plan on being here forever. So you're not getting rid of us like that anytime soon.
Nope.
So we appreciate everybody tuning in. And until next time, we'll catch you on the Cook the Books podcast. Thanks for tuning in to the Cook the Books podcast by Tea with Coffee Media. Interested in supporting this podcast and our independent press?
Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok to stay updated with all the latest Tea with Coffee Media updates.
You can also sign up for our monthly newsletter by visiting teawithcoffee.media.
Finally, visit our Patreon to get early access to the Cook the Books podcast, free access to all Tea with Coffee Media ebooks, and the chance to win cool prizes.
You've been listening to the Cook the Books podcast with me, Tyler Witkowski.
And me, Kelsey Ann Lovelady. Until next time.